Now, NASA's released new images of an interstellar object astronomers say is a comet, probably even older than our own solar system.
Amateur astronomers just found something buried inside Starlink data, and nobody in any official capacity will tell you what it is. Not NASA, not the Department of Defense, not SpaceX. A small network of backyard telescope operators, running their own software on their own time, detected an object operating at 550 kilometers above Earth, right inside the world's most watched satellite constellation. That doesn't exist in any public catalog. It has been actively holding position for weeks. It is maneuvering, and every institution with the authority to identify it has responded with carefully worded silence. That silence is the story. The sky changed. 10 years ago, if you stepped outside on a clear night and looked up, you were looking at a sky that was roughly the same one your grandparents saw. Stars, planets, maybe the occasional visible satellite crawling slowly across the dark. A mostly clean canvas that had changed little since humanity first started cataloging the heavens. That sky is gone.
It's like about a millimeter in diameter. It's really small. And he looked at that and he said, man, if that hit one of us.
Since SpaceX began launching Starlink satellites in 2019, low Earth orbit has been transformed. There are now over 6,000 Starlink satellites circling the planet at an altitude of approximately 550 kilometers, forming what amounts to a dense, constantly moving mesh stretched across the entire globe.
In densely populated areas, Starlink works differently than it might be in a place with not as many people.
The goal was always ambitious and genuinely useful. High-speed internet for remote communities, developing regions, maritime vessels, disaster zones. The kind of connectivity that could reshape how billions of people access information. But that constellation created a side effect nobody fully anticipated. It turned the night sky into an obstacle course for astronomers. Professional observatories began throwing out corrupted image data by the terabyte. Deep field surveys that required hours of careful, uninterrupted exposure suddenly found bright streaks cutting across their frames. Each streak a Starlink satellite moving at nearly 28,000 kilometers per hour. For professional astronomers, Starlink became a headache. A bureaucratic, funding-threatening, scientifically infuriating headache. Here's what that actually means for the rest of this story. The people whose job it is to monitor the sky professionally had every incentive to look past the Starlink constellation, to treat it as noise, to build software that filters it out and moves on, which means the people best positioned to notice something wrong inside that constellation were not the ones getting paid to look.
To start with, I'd like to address the rumors right at the beginning. I think it's important that we talk about that. This object is a comet.
For a specific subset of amateur astronomers, Starlink became something else entirely, a puzzle, and puzzles, for certain kinds of people, are impossible to put down. The Watchers. The people who call themselves the Orbital Sentinel Network are not the kind of people you'd expect to uncover one of the most quietly unsettling space mysteries in years. They don't work at universities. They don't have observatory budgets. They have backyards, mid-range, telescopes, open-source tracking software, and an almost pathological need to understand why things in the sky don't always behave the way they should. The network formed organically, the way the best amateur science communities always do, through forums, through shared frustrations, through the specific energy that emerges when smart people realize they're all staring at the same anomaly, and none of them can explain it. Marcus, the software engineer in Portland, is part of the core group. So is a high school physics teacher in Seattle and a small business owner in Vancouver. They coordinate over encrypted messaging platforms. They run their own shared data server. They argue with each other constantly, demanding rigor and skepticism from every member before any claim gets elevated from interesting to worth investigating. What they had been building for months before any of this happened was a baseline. Night after night, they tracked Starlink satellite positions, documented brightness fluctuations, cataloged how the constellation behaved in every measurable way. Not because anything was wrong, because knowing exactly what normal looks like is the only way to recognize something that isn't. And this is where it gets strange. On an October night, Marcus's software flagged something in the space between two Starlink satellites, an electromagnetic signature that didn't match any object in any catalog he had access to. He tagged it as a probable equipment artifact and sent a note to the group. He assumed they'd confirm the error and move on. They didn't confirm the error, they found the same thing. If you want to follow this investigation in real time, because the object is still up there and the answer is still coming, subscribe now and hit the bell. This story is not finished. The signal. Here's what good science looks like when something genuinely strange appears. You dismiss it first, then you verify it. Then, if verification keeps failing, you sit with the discomfort of not having an explanation. The network's automated software had flagged the signature while tracking a cluster of Starlink satellites over the Pacific Northwest. The signature appeared to originate not from any of the satellites themselves, but from the space between them. Marcus logged it, tagged it as equipment artifact, needs verification, and moved on. Then it happened again. Different observer, different geographic location, different equipment, same signature. Then a third time. 3 independent observers in 3 different states, all monitoring the same cluster of Starlink satellites within a 1-week window.
Right away, of course, NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office they studied it, and they established that 3i Atlas is not a danger to Earth.
All flagging the same anomaly from the same approximate location in the sky. At that point, the Orbital Sentinel Network did what it always does when individual certainty gives way to collective pattern. They compared notes systematically, cross-referenced the data against every public resource available. Satellite tracking databases, published orbital mechanics calculations, publicly released Starlink telemetry, and started asking a question that none of them were particularly comfortable asking. What is that? Pay attention to this part, because the question itself is the discovery. They were not asking, could this be an error? They had already eliminated that. They were asking what, specifically, was producing a signature in a region of orbital space where nothing was officially registered to exist. That question took them from hobbyists tracking satellites to investigators documenting something that had no business being there, and it kept not being in any catalog, no matter where they looked. Confirmed. By mid-October, after weeks of systematic skepticism-first investigation, the Orbital Sentinel Network had moved past anomalous reading and into something much more specific. They had confirmed the existence of an unidentified object in near-Earth orbit. Here's what that actually means. The object operates at an altitude of approximately 550 kilometers, exactly the orbital height of Starlink's primary constellation. Its orbital velocity matches that of the Starlink satellites it travels alongside, which means either its design parameters are nearly identical to SpaceX hardware, or its position relative to the constellation is being deliberately maintained. It does not emit detectable radio signals on any standard frequency bands. It does not consistently appear in optical wavelengths, making it extraordinarily difficult to image. It shows up briefly, intermittently, and only under specific observational conditions. Most critically, it maintains what orbital mechanics researchers call station keeping, a stable, consistent spatial relationship with a specific cluster of Starlink satellites. It is not drifting. It is not following a chaotic path. It is moving in deliberate, calculated concert with the constellation around it, never deviating from a formation that would require continuous active propulsion and sophisticated navigation systems to sustain. And this is where it gets strange, because the object wasn't in any official catalog, no registered satellite, no documented debris, no acknowledged test platform, nothing. The Orbital Sentinel Network had found something that
it means it can tell us whether the physics that went into forming our solar system are similar in other star systems.
According to every public database maintained by every space tracking institution on Earth, should not exist. No answer. Some members of the amateur network reached out to NASA, informally, carefully, framing their inquiry in the measured language of scientific observation rather than accusation. They described what they had documented. They listed their observational data. They asked simply whether the agency had any knowledge of an unregistered object operating in this specific region of the Starlink constellation. The response they received was a masterclass in saying nothing while appearing to say something. The space agency confirmed awareness of various objects in near-Earth orbit and its tracking capabilities for all catalog debris. It confirmed ongoing monitoring of the orbital environment with partners and international stakeholders. What it did not do, specifically, deliberately, and notably, was confirm or deny any knowledge of the specific object in question. Pay attention to this part. That is not a standard bureaucratic non-response. Space agencies routinely clarify misidentified objects. They correct amateur data when amateurs have made errors. A direct inquiry about a specific anomalous signature in a specific orbital region, sent by a network with verified independent observations from multiple geographic locations, would normally get a clarifying response if the object were something benign and already known. It didn't get one. Dr. Michael Chen, sitting in his office at the University of British Columbia, where he had been monitoring amateur astronomy networks, read the networks compiled data shortly after the NASA exchange. His analysis, offered in correspondence with the group, landed hard. What's fascinating isn't just that the signal existed, but that it only appeared when observers were looking through the Starlink swarm. It's as if something was using the satellites as a kind of mask or background, a mask. The word sat with the network for days, because if that's the right description, if something had deliberately positioned itself inside a constellation of thousands of satellites, specifically because the electromagnetic noise of that constellation would make it harder to detect. 3 theories. Then the question isn't just what is it? The question is whose is it, and what does it want? Within the amateur astronomy community, and quietly among a handful of professional researchers who have been monitoring the situation, 3 theories have emerged. None are definitive. All are grounded in established science and documented historical precedent. The first theory is space debris, specifically an undocumented fragment from a satellite collision or an anti-satellite weapons test. Here's what that actually means for this theory. Debris doesn't maintain formation. Debris follows chaotic, decaying paths. Whatever this object is, it is actively holding position inside the Starlink swarm. Debris cannot do that. This theory doesn't survive its first contact with the station keeping data.
Well, scientists are keeping a close eye on a massive object flying straight toward our sun, the Manhattan.
The second theory is a classified reconnaissance satellite, a spy asset belonging to a spacefaring nation that has intentionally positioned itself inside the Starlink constellation to use its electromagnetic noise as cover. This theory has gained the most traction within the network, and for good reason. It fits existing patterns of known intelligent satellite behavior. Nations with advanced space programs have a long, documented history of placing surveillance assets in positions designed to obscure their true purpose, the electromagnetics. Clutter generated by thousands of Starlink satellites would make detecting a quiet, radio-passive observer significantly harder. And this is where it gets strange. The object's behavior is not consistent with malfunction or drift. It is consistent with intent. The third theory involves experimental proximity operations, a test platform developed by a space agency to practice the autonomous navigation techniques required for active debris removal. Space agencies globally have invested heavily in developing technologies designed to rendezvous with defunct satellites and safely deorbit them. A vehicle designed to do that would necessarily display the kind of careful station keeping this object shows, and such tests are frequently conducted in secrecy to avoid tipping off adversaries about developing capabilities. Here's what that actually means. Every single theory on this list requires a nation or organization with advanced space capability to have placed this object here, deliberately, without disclosing it. The theories differ only in purpose. They agree on everything else. The cover-up. Here's the uncomfortable truth about orbital space right now. The official catalog of what's up there is not a complete list. It is a floor, not a ceiling. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 requires nations to register space objects with the United Nations, but registration frequently happens long after launch, and some launches never result in public registration at all. The U.S. Space Force currently tracks approximately 27,000 objects in orbit. Of those, roughly 7,000 are active satellites. But that tracking system only captures objects large enough for ground-based radar to reliably detect. Hundreds of thousands of smaller objects are effectively invisible to current cataloging systems. The object the Orbital Sentinel network detected is not small. Their optical analysis places it somewhere between 5 and 20 meters in length. consistent with a small satellite or spacecraft module. Something that size should appear in official catalogs. The fact that it doesn't isn't a measurement gap, it's a disclosure gap. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, an astrophysicist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory,
it's just like finding an object from the street in your backyard, and it doesn't look like a rock that you are familiar with.
Offered a perspective that should give everyone pause. In a recent interview, she noted that what the amateur community uncovered points directly to a limitation in current tracking and cataloging systems. Systems built on the assumption that all major orbital assets would be reported, registered, or at least recognized. Space, she continued, is large, and surveillance of space is harder than most people appreciate. Pay attention to this part. She is not saying the system failed to detect something. She is saying the system was never built to catch something that didn't want to be cataloged. Those are very different problems. One is a technical limitation. The other is a structural one. And structural problems don't get fixed with better radar. The blind spot. There's a specific structural reason why a network of hobbyists found this, and a billion-dollar observatory didn't. And it has nothing to do with skill or intelligence. Professional astronomers have professional priorities: deep field surveys, exoplanet detection, gravitational wave monitoring. The Starlink constellation is their enemy, not their subject. They look through it, not at it. Their software is designed to flag Starlink satellites as noise to be discarded, not data to be studied. Amateur satellite trackers do the opposite. They look at the constellation the way a birdwatcher looks at a crowded tree, not searching for one species, but watching the whole system, tuned to notice when something doesn't belong. Here's what that actually means in practice. A network scattered across a continent can track an object continuously as it completes multiple 90-minute orbits, comparing observations in near real time, catching inconsistencies that a single observatory, looking through a single window, would miss entirely. The distribution isn't just an advantage. For this specific kind of discovery, it was the only approach that could have worked. And then there's the freedom advantage. A professional astronomer at a major research institution faces publication pressure, grant pressure, peer pressure. An anomalous electromagnetic signature from an unidentified orbital object isn't a grant-winning research topic. It's a career risk wrapped in uncertainty. Marcus can spend 3 weeks obsessing over exactly that kind of anomaly because no department chair is waiting on his findings. They didn't find this because they were looking for it. They found it because they refused to look away from something that didn't make sense. Hiding in plain sight. Understanding exactly how difficult it is to do what this object is doing makes what's happening above us considerably more unsettling. Objects in near-Earth orbit at 550 kilometers, travel at approximately 28,000 kilometers per hour. They complete one full orbit of the Earth every 90 minutes.
So Starlink is very complementary to the existing telecom companies.
Maintaining a consistent spatial relationship with another object at these velocities is not a passive activity. It requires constant, calculated course corrections. Every thruster firing must be precisely timed and sized. Every adjustment in altitude changes orbital velocity, which changes position relative to everything else in the same orbital shell. Here's what that actually means in terms of what this requires. The mathematics were worked out by Newton and refined over decades of practical spaceflight. They are not simple and they are not cheap. Propellant is finite and every course correction burns some of it. The unidentified object has maintained its formation with a specific Starlink cluster since early October. That means either it carries an automated navigation system sophisticated enough to execute these corrections continuously without human input, which implies an extraordinary level of autonomous systems engineering, or there are operators somewhere, in some facility, in some country, sitting at a console and issuing course correction commands right now, as you're watching this, keeping that object exactly where it needs to be. And this is where it gets strange. Neither option is the behavior of a passive, accidental, or abandoned object. Both options require active, ongoing, deliberate involvement. Someone made a decision to put this thing in that exact position inside the Starlink constellation. Someone is making ongoing decisions to keep it there. The question of who that is remains officially unanswered. Still up there. The orbital sentinel network is still watching. The object is still there. The official silence continues. Some members of the network have begun sharing their raw observation data through scientific preprint servers, making it available to researchers who want to examine the methodology themselves. The path from amateur observation to formal scientific acknowledgement is slow, and when classified systems are involved, it can stretch from months into years. There are only two realistic paths to resolution. The first is deliberate disclosure. Whoever controls this object decides, or is pressured, to acknowledge its existence and explain its purpose. That could happen through a Freedom of Information request that hits the right desk, through a leak, or through the kind of quiet behind-the-scenes acknowledgement that governments sometimes offer when the alternative is a more embarrassing public revelation. The second path is accumulation. Enough independent observation data from enough different sources until secrecy becomes operationally untenable. That's the path the amateur community is currently walking, and every new session of tracking adds to a body of evidence that becomes harder to officially dismiss. Pay attention to this part, because it matters. Neither path has a guaranteed timeline. And in the interim, an object that no official body will acknowledge is performing active orbital maneuvers inside a constellation that provides internet service to hundreds of millions of people. It is maintaining formation with satellites that billions of people depend on. And the institutions with the authority and the technology to tell us what it is have, so far, chosen not to. The Orbital Sentinel Network logs another session tonight. The object will complete another 16 orbits before sunrise. And somewhere, in a facility, in a country, at a classification level none of us will be briefed on, someone will make another small adjustment to keep it exactly where they want it. Drop a comment below. What do you think it is? A spy satellite running dark inside the Starlink swarm? A proximity operations test that wasn't supposed to be noticed? Something else entirely? The network is still collecting data. This channel will be here when the next piece lands. Subscribe so you're there when it does.